The 29th UN Climate Conference, or COP29, is set to take place from November 11th to November 22nd in Baku, Azerbaijan, as global leaders look to scale up funding mechanisms to support vulnerable nations through climate financing. Climate finance is the funding provided to help countries tackle climate change, whether by reducing emissions or adapting to its impacts. This financing comes from public, private and international sources.
I would say the climate finance is to address all action to address climate change, and particularly from a mitigation aspect, financing to ensure that countries are able to come up with actions that would be in line with their commitment towards the Paris Agreement goals, which is to keep temperature rise under 1.5 degrees Celsius. Now, what are the sources of climate finance? Now, I would put it in two large buckets to start off with. I would say one is what is called the public finance, which is directly financing that comes from governments, which is public. The other one is private finance.
The UN Framework Convention on Climate Change urges developed countries to provide financial support to developing nations, which are often the hardest hit by climate change but lack the resources to respond effectively. Developing countries also have smaller domestic financial systems relative to their GDPs and face higher costs of capital.
All countries' resources the wealth is not the same. So, to facilitate the provision of climate finance, the convention established a financial mechanism to provide the financial resources to developing country, mainly from the developed country. The finance mechanism also serves the Kyoto Protocol and Paris Agreement.
India, one of the world's most climate vulnerable countries, is also a key player in climate negotiations. With ambitious targets like achieving 500 gigawatts of non-fossil fuel energy by 2030 and becoming net zero by 2070, India will require significant climate finance to achieve its goals. Estimates suggest the country will need trillions of dollars over the coming decades to transition to clean energy and meet its climate targets.
If you look at India's NDC, the Nationally Determined Contribution 2030, and if you look at the document that the Government of India itself published, they expect something like, I think the figure is something like over 2.3 trillion, something like about 17 billion per year till about 2030 is the requirement for climate finance for India alone, right? Now, a lot of the investments that, and let's sort of put it in certain perspective, right? Right now, we have roughly about 200 gigawatts of renewables. We need to touch 500 gigawatts of renewables by 2030. Bulk of the 200 gigawatts of renewables that we have is from private investments. So I would assume that the remaining 300 gigawatts of renewable energy that will come on stream will also be largely private investments. But like I said, there will be some public component like the subsidies for the PM Surya Ghar, Muft Bijli Yojana, and so on and so forth.
The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development reported that in 2022, they provided nearly $116 billion in climate finance, predominantly in loans which account to about 70%. At COP29, India and other developing nations are advocating for more reliable and equitable financing, with discussions on the new collective quantified goal to establish new funding targets for post-2025. These funds are essential for countries like India for balancing economic development and climate action.